pretty skilled with this.
Hey. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Natalie.
Of course.
Yay, how exciting. Yeah, I know that people had some questions. And then here, let me move these cameras so that maybe I can like not be looking two different directions too much.
Same here. I feel like I was trying to set that up.
Where
earlier.
do I look?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. Oh, hi everyone. It's so
better.
great to see you. Thanks for joining.
All right. So yeah, I know we had some questions from viewers, so we will get to that in the second half. But I also really wanted the opportunity to ask Natalie about her healing story because, like a lot of us practitioners, we came to this career and this path through our own healing journey. And yeah, I definitely wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about that, Natalie. So maybe we can start out just, as much as you want to share, telling people about how things were for you when your health was at its worst.
Yeah. So when my health was at its worst, I think what I've, thinking back on my journey, I like to give people a really good, clear picture that it's really messy, right? So there's actually like two big like rock bottoms that I would say that I had. So there wasn't just like one time. But at my worst in both of those situations, I was experiencing a lot of cystic acne, like chronic cystic acne and chronic infections like bronchitis infections that were so bad they would last for months. The first time, this was back when I was in college, and this was back before I knew anything about any kind of alternative healthcare.
Yeah.
And so I had several rounds of antibiotic usage at that point, and the cystic acne just flared so much worse after those few things. And after that, I was suffering from a lot of debilitating fatigue, and I would compare myself at school to like my friends and my roommates and everything, and I would look at like how much they were able to do, and I just forced myself to try to do it, but I just felt so drained all the time from that. Not to mention I didn't have the best diet at that time, so that definitely contributed. It was around that time, my freshman year of college. My mom started to be like, okay, let's have you see a naturopathic doctor and have you figure out the cystic acne, because it was starting to really impact my self-confidence. And then I also was it just everything was culminating at that point for me with dealing with PTSD because of childhood trauma. That was starting to come up, so I'm like having much more anxiety, like with social anxiety, but also just chronic anxiety throughout. I had never really acknowledged that as a feeling until at that point. I started going to therapy during that time, which was helpful. It was like what I needed to keep myself afloat. And then, so lots of anxiety, depression during that time, and finally saw a naturopathic doctor. I also had very debilitating PMS cramps. So bad that I would get ghost white from cramps if I didn't take Advil early enough. And I was always interested in being like healthy and whatnot. So I was like, I don't want to be dependent on this Advil. I feel like this isn't right. But I would just get so ghostly white. It would feel like someone was like stabbing me with pain inside my uterus. And it was debilitating. I couldn't do anything. I had to like call off work sometimes. This is a chronic thing. But I also, like most women in our society, dealt with disordered eating, a lot of under eating, and so I had and then over exercising, and so I had a lot of huge hormonal imbalances from that, and that contributed to not just the severe PMS pain, but irregular periods, and sometimes I'd skip periods. And so like there were sometimes months where I didn't have a cycle. So that was the worst. I didn't realize at the time that that the immune compromised symptoms that I was having from the bronchitis and the hormone connection and the disordered eating was all related.
Right.
And then even still, like more so, it was like just recently, I'd say like a couple of years ago, that I really connected that to the nervous system and healing the nervous system,
Yeah.
because of just chronic stress from trauma and not learning. Well, I had my own coping mechanisms the whole time, right? Like ever since that, which was helpful. But I started to connect that even during that time, I also had a lot of nervous system symptoms, like tingling, numbness and tingling in my hands and feet. I would have a lot of just weird kind of sensations with like it's kind of dissociative patterns with like, engaging with the world and whatnot. So so that was the worst, the worst of the worst. Initially, that was my rock bottom. And then that happened again. Most of those things happen again to me, not all of them, but kind of less severe. But the cystic acne came back actually 3 years after I had started healing.
Wow.
Diet. Yeah. And that was actually due to, I had a mercury filling and I had that removed. And so all of my symptoms, I knew it was what I needed to do. I wanted to get rid of that. But it was a natural process of my body getting rid of the heavy metals on its own. Just, it wasn't right after removal of the mercury fillings, and I was doing the GAPS diet. I was doing a lot of supportive things for my body. So I can't imagine what it would have been like without those things. Is what I tell people. But after removing it, it was like 6 months later, the body can tell that source of mercury is gone. And so the body starts to say, okay, let's get rid of these things. So all of I had terrible, I didn't recognize my gastrointestinal symptoms as much initially during that first rock bottom, but this second rock bottom, I had bloating, chronic candida. I had a lot of UTIs in the past. Some UTIs popped up again. So like later on, I knew I had an oxalate burden contributing to that. And it just took my body another couple of I would say within 6 months, I was on the right track again. After that removal, but during like after the 6-month mark and for another 6 months, I was like doubting everything. I was like, is this still working for me? I tried other things. I tried the AIP diet. I tried supplementing for like the bloating, gastrointestinal symptoms. I took so many supplements. At that time, I was working at a functional medicine clinic. So I was like, let's do all the tests. I had a GI map test done. I had done another food sensitivity test, and it said I had so many more food sensitivities than I did before, even though I had felt better with reintroducing a couple of those. So I took them out again and kept doing the GAPS diet, though ultimately is what got me back to like my cystic acne gone again. It was always hormonal, like around my chin, but also on my neck and chest, which is a lot of the time like infections. It's like a chronic infection or immune related. And so it just took time, and was able to again reverse my dairy intolerance yet a second time, and then my egg intolerance yet a second time. But that was difficult. It is very challenging to think that you're going, I think I hear this all the time. You and I, we hear this all the time from our clients. Like, is this working? I should feel better. by
Yeah.
now, right? Like
Right.
I said all the same things to myself, which
Yes.
only further set my nervous system back, because that's so stressful to tell
Yes.
yourself that all
Yes.
the time.
Yes.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until learning from, because we've met in Mary Reddick's
Yeah.
practitioner training group, and in that group I learned more about the nervous system resetting,
Yeah.
and learning, really applying more of those things, saw past some lingering remaining symptoms for me,
Right.
that were more so the nervous system symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah, I really want to circle back to like your second resurgence of symptoms, because I think that's so fascinating. There's a lot of really good things to dig into there. But I just want to comment about, you describing all the different ways that your chronic illness symptoms were manifesting, and the fact that you finally realized, like, the more and more you learned that, oh, wait, all of these things are actually connected. Like, this is like an issue of like greater systemic inflammation. And I think this is where, I'm curious if you see this too, but I feel like a lot of clients get stuck. And I was originally stuck in this too, because I was very similar to you, where I had symptoms in every system of my body. And somehow intuitively, I knew that there must be a connection, because they were all increasing at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. But I would ask doctors and I would ask practitioners, I'd be like, but I'm also getting this other thing. Like, I'm here to see you about this, but I'm also having these other things. And they would be really dismissive, like not even really acknowledge, that I had even said it, and I feel like there's gotta be something that ties all of this together. Yeah. Do you see that as well, in terms of people trying to wrap their heads around like what is happening to them?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was, so when I initially was told by my naturopath, oh, you have food sensitivities, she gave me a protocol to follow to, like, heal my leaky gut at that time. And it just didn't sink in very well for me. I wasn't compliant. I was in college, so I wasn't as compliant. And I wonder if I had back then followed what she had recommended, if it would have helped. But I don't think it would have, because I needed to actually, like, the protocol that she gave me wasn't, it was mostly supplementation, and it wasn't, again, getting at the root of the problem. And I think somewhere in me, I knew that, like, this is just a Band-Aid still. We're just going to supplement, which I definitely needed those supplements like zinc and omegas, all of that. But for me, I've always been looking for, like, how do these things connect? And it felt, it definitely, I chose to be vegetarian my freshman year. And so when I found out about some of my food sensitivities, like from eggs and dairy, I wasn't told, about the nutrition that I'm missing out on from cutting those foods out. And that, I think, was a huge disservice to me, and why I'm not a huge fan of food sensitivity tests anymore. Because yes, you can be reacting to those foods, but again, it's like a Band-Aid approach to that solution.
And amazing how naturopathic medicine really often takes that same approach of like, let's just chase symptoms, right? So it's like, oh yeah, like you just eliminate this food sensitivity you have supposedly, or like, oh, you tested positive for this bacteria, so here, like, take this oregano oil, or like, you know what I mean? Like it continues in a parallel way often to Western medicine, where it's just like, let's just pick at these symptoms, as opposed to like, let's really zoom out. And like you're saying, that's really the approach you're taking as well with your clients and with yourself.
Yes. And the hard part with that I think, when you're in it and doing the work, for like, when you see Jen or I, we're working from that, we've got the big picture ahead of you. Like, we know how long it takes to now, to work through certain conditions, like how long it should take to reverse that. But when you're in it and you're going through it yourself, even with a big picture, there's the daily ins and outs of what do you do in these moments that are really challenging. And that's why I was seeing a nutritionist during that time, like, because I needed that support, someone to have that big picture in mind,
Yeah.
because you get lost in the weeds. It's so
Yes.
easy. I went chasing after anything for, like, you're just desperate. You're in that state of desperation for some relief. And
Yes.
sometimes that relief is a delayed gratification for when you
Yes.
have like a big picture approach and you're working with nutrition
Mhm.
to really get at the root of all of these symptoms,
Yeah.
to get to really underline, kind of rebuild all of these systems at the same time. Some of them take different lengths of time to rebuild. So
Mhm.
I definitely always saw improvements very quickly, which is not, especially in regards to my skin and, let's see, and my mood and energy levels. Those areas I saw very quickly improvement.
Yeah.
Some skin issues, though, like I suffered from a lot of eczema and psoriasis, like on my scalp, and that took a lot longer. So,
Yeah.
so there were some things that cleared up really quickly, like my acne, but then these other areas that took a lot longer. So in
Mhm.
that, you can get really hyper focused on those
Yeah.
symptoms and really forget how much progress you've had
Yeah.
in this short amount of time. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
some of this healing has to happen kind of in layers as well,
mhm,
like some system can't really be prioritized in healing until another system has made a little progress, and so you kind of see this
mhm,
complex, like, interlocking, continuum of how your healing unfolds.
totally.
And that's what I really want to get to next, because I know we've talked about this before as well, is how healing is really kind of being in a deep dark pit a lot of the times, or like you kind of have to go through this, um like, it gets worse before it gets better. I often talk about, like, traversing through the underworld to kind of take a,
Yeah,
like, hero's journey approach for it,
it is.
and yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, like, just the process of healing, and what that was like for you. Obviously, you said you went kind of through it twice, but maybe,
Mhm.
you can talk about the initial time first.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, when I first actually started to see improvements with my health, that was the first time I did gaps was with a practitioner, and it was about 8 years after my that rock bottom. So I that those 8 years without actual guidance, like,
Yeah.
was so, like, scattered. Like, it's hard
Yeah.
for me to even pinpoint like what I was doing. Like, yes,
Yeah.
I had just taken out, all I did was took out uh gluten and sugar and dairy, but like occasionally I would like have it and like have
Mhm.
these like really intense experiences of like depression and fatigue from that. And so it was really drawn out, those
Mhm.
8 years of just, yes, the gluten-free, dairy-free helped my acne, but it didn't help me in these other areas. And then I
Yeah.
started to actually develop more food sensitivities. Like, I
Yeah.
would start reacting to almonds, and then there were mostly like most nuts and seeds. Like, I
Mhm.
started to react to. They were just so fibrous, um, and then so yeah, like I would say I was trying to work on my health during that time, and it was really not successful.
Yeah.
But then when I first started the GAPS diet, and I started on full GAPS, with my practitioner, which really helped with, like, I tend towards sluggish stools, and so
Mhm.
that really was helpful, balancing my blood sugar. My hormones started regulating. Like, I felt pretty good before I even got to my first GAPS intro. And then GAPS intro, I did that and I felt worse. Like, I felt more fatigued, of course.
Yeah.
I'd say, the constipation, a lot of people, I've seen this on GAPS channels and stuff like that, or on like Facebook groups, but people say like GAPS causes constipation.
Mhm.
um, it is constipation did increase during that first week for me, but every time I've done the soups for an extended period of time, towards the end of that month, like my stools are much more regular. So I know it's helping. And there's always that, there's what's happening in that time. I if I don't do enemas, like I know like it's toxicity. It's the toxins from die-off of bacteria that have not fully, they're not trying, or they're trying to not get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, those those things definitely got worse. And
Yeah.
gastrointestinal symptoms I find are very they fluctuate so much when you're healing.
Yeah.
I try not to like be attached to anything, any kind of thing that might, I'm looking and I'm observing, but I'm not going to get attached to like, okay, didn't have a, like, what did I do wrong the next
Yeah.
what was it that I was eating? Like most of the time for me, it has to do with my nervous system, like how stressed I am. And so just the more I obsess around those things, I would, which is what I did initially. That's all. So I'm talking from hindsight, So during that time, I would be so obsessive about every little thing in my body, like every little symptom. Oh no, like a rash showed up. My skin is worse. I overate this new introduction of this food, and like, is that going to set me back? And to be quite honest, like when I've done the GAPS diet initially, I'd always jump ship too early on introductions. So especially with starches. So I would always stay away from sugars, but I'd go for like cassava flour tortillas or something like that, or sweet potatoes. And I think what I love to tell people is, even though in the dark, like the worst times during that healing process, I still think of it as like, those are the best times I've ever felt in my life. Like it's hard to describe, I guess, like, because my energy levels were so good and I felt so calm and centered, more so than I felt in any other time in my life. So I know that much is like, it is helpful. And the only reasons I would jump ship was mostly because of traveling or family like social gatherings. And then I had to commit. I actually was realizing that, yes, I was still getting benefits doing it that way, like doing the GAPS diet for myself every couple of years, or a couple times a year. I would do like an extended time period of doing GAPS intro. But I realized, yes, I was getting benefits each time, but there were these lingering symptoms that still were present. And I knew that it was because I wasn't getting past those other family die-offs in the process. And those, the knowledge alone of just that some of those bacteria will last 24 months. They're just, that just, I learned that, and I was like, okay, I have to stick with this and see it through. It's that delayed gratification. And now, like, I don't even, like, at the other side of it, it's like, I don't even, initially in starting and embarking on that journey, I was like, I can't imagine not having those starches in my diet. And now it's like, I don't crave them at all. That really is how transformational this kind of microbiome shifting diet is. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to eat them when, like, I want them. But most of the time I don't want them because I feel so good without them. And so sorry, that was a tangent, but to answer your question, I mean, I hope people do get an idea that when I had the second bout of symptoms come up, like, I mean, the doubt, the self-doubt and kind of despair that you have of feeling like you failed. That was primarily what was so hard, for me. Like, just so much fear of failure and consistently double guessing myself.
Yep.
But there's little moments throughout that keep you going. And that's when, those are the elements that I've focused on in looking back. I'm like, oh, wow. It's hard for me to even describe how poorly my health was, like energy wise, being able to keep up with workload. Like I would get home from work and just be exhausted, and like I would it interrupted my social life. And that was, the interruption with my social life from fatigue was worse for me than an interruption from like me choosing to change my diet around people, right? Like I'd much rather take that because I feel like I'm present, I'm connected with people still. Whereas when you're so tired and drained, there's nothing to give. I didn't have anything to give. Even if I was in a social environment, I didn't feel like I could give. And so, that was really hard. So many nights crying, feeling badly for myself. Right. And it's interesting actually how the healing, like you're saying, like getting, not a lot of people, we stray from like a lot of this talk, I'm like talking about physical things, but the underlying root to my illnesses, I think, have always stemmed from a lack of self-love, right? So I always looked at my body's symptoms, or I started to learn, actually, not always. Initially, it was like, what the hell, body? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you revolting? And also like out of hate, right? Like I was like so frustrated with my body. And then, and I always, on my website, on my story, like if you read it, like I had to work on my mental, like I had to go to therapy, honestly, before I could, and take some steps mentally to, or psychologically, to work on self-love. And then I was able to follow through more with some of the dietary changes and behavioral changes, lifestyle changes that I needed to do. So then, and then now, like, more recently, I would say like my healing journey has been a long journey, and more recently I really felt like I've got a handle, I got those, I got to where I like really wanted to be with my health. And now I'm like just maintaining that. So a couple, just really recently, it's been like the last 4 or 5 years where it's like a practice of every time I have a symptom, loving, like practicing self-love and being like, thank you, body, for telling me something's going on. Some things maybe situationally, I'm not in the right job, like maybe I'm not in the right environment for my safety, for my, just what's in alignment to my values. So much of the healing journey has been stepping into more self-love for myself and really becoming like who I really wanted to be in this life, who I really like getting more aligned with my values, and acknowledging that like if I have symptoms, it's really a part of me that's telling me something's going on and I need to listen to that. And it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing at all. And so that's what's happening during the healing journey, right? Like that's why these things happen, is for us to learn more about ourselves.
Oh my goodness, Natalie, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I really couldn't have said it better. Like, and there's so much we're in such a toxic environment in our
Mhm.
society, right? That, yeah, there's this huge, immense amount of physical healing that needs to happen to recover from these like multi-dimensional illnesses, right?
Mhm.
And when you are going through those kind of deep, dark periods, like that is healing. Like that is what healing looks like. Like when you clean out the gutters, you're going to get
Yeah.
dirty, right? And so recognizing that there's going to be these like layers and layers of your body just like pulling out like the junk and the toxins, and that's going to look like weird symptoms and sometimes uncomfortable symptoms, and sometimes a lot of fatigue or no energy to socialize, like you were saying, like all of these things. And I mean, I've been, actively healing for 5.5 years now,
Mhm.
and certainly like the first 2 years were by far the most intense.
Mhm.
But even since then, like, even as after I kind of, gave myself kind of a landmark of like, okay, I'm in remission,
Mhm.
um, still like as I start implementing new healing protocols or a new angle or a new practice, like I will inevitably go through kind of a dark dip, into
Yeah.
some really profound healing. And, um, all of this, and this is your most recent point, which was so fantastic. Thank you. That like this is all held in the framework of like what the state of our nervous system is, right? And if
Mhm.
we are seeing all these symptoms of healing as if we're impatient with it, or we're frustrated with ourselves, or we're seeing it as a betrayal, or something wrong with us that we're going through this, it's going to block our healing process, right? Because that creates this state of stress in the body, and it'll kind of like just shut everything down,
Mhm.
whereas like you're saying, if you're able to have this like engaged relationship with your own body and your own nervous system and recognize like, oh my gosh, like my body is doing such profound, deep healing
Mhm.
work. And I love that about my body. And I trust my body to, do this appropriately.
Yeah.
And all this kind of stuff that you're saying. I mean, that is really like the foundation that all of these other practices have to come from. And I tell my clients a lot, like you can do the diet and you can do the supplements, but if you are not having like a deeply trusting, loving relationship with your own body, like there's only so much it's going to do, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the third piece that a lot of people miss. And it's hard enough to like learn all these new things and things like that. So it just takes time, and so we do have to have grace towards ourselves, because initially it's so human to
Yeah.
fall back into those neural pathways that
Yes.
we've been taught and conditioned to always be critical about.
Yes.
Okay, what's this mean? Okay, now we have to, it's like a causal relationship, right? Like this
Yes.
happens, like what caused it? But
Yes.
yeah, stepping out and looking at our body as a system, and in
Hmm.
this greater sense of the system, or greater, our body is a system, and we live in a bigger system, right? There's
Yes.
all these different systems involved and
Yes.
lots of variables, so we're not always going to know. We're not.
Yes.
And a huge lesson recently that I think can help a lot of people, and has was helpful to me, was acknowledging that, yeah, we don't always have to know why.
Yes.
It's such a childlike answer or
Yeah.
question, and
Yes.
it gets that there's a great part of all of us that is driving curiosity. And that's what brings us to a lot of areas, or people, practitioners, or
Yeah.
ideas, new
Yeah.
ideas that help us with healing. And some questions should just not be answered.
Yeah.
They just are not meant to be answered. and
Yeah. Or
and
don't need to be,
yeah.
right? Yeah. I mean, because I think, you and I, we both know a lot about the body and about health. So I mean, a lot of times if people are coming to me with a question of like, what is this? I can usually hypothesize something, but
Yeah.
there's always going to be those times where it's like, I don't know, but something's shifting, right? Like
Yeah.
something's changing, something's happening, and you can just
Yeah.
trust that. Like I tell my clients a lot, like if you're seeing something shift, even if you don't quite understand it or fully comprehend it, like that's important. Just like sit with that. Like something is changing. And that's
Mhm.
really profound just itself.
Totally, totally. And I think where people, and I, as a practitioner, while I was healing, like I was practicing with people.
Yeah.
I think for for a lot of people in the healing journey, you want to just know that you're safe.
Yeah.
That like, okay, if nothing's gonna go terribly wrong.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about nutrition, like I had wanted to initially become a naturopathic doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a big reason why I didn't go that route was because there's a lot of risks with the types of treatments that they are using. Like their
Right.
toolbox is much greater and much more um, risky at times. You know,
Yeah.
some treatments you want to, they have to be tested and tried and true, right? But what in our studies of nutrition, what we know is that like our bodies are very adaptable and
Right.
there's not a lot of diets or dietary changes that are really going to cause an alarming emergency
Right.
situation. Like you're not going to die from you can die from malnourishment, but it's not going to be overnight, right?
Right. Right.
And so, you know, there's a lot of comfort in that you making these changes are really safe. They're
Yes.
not gonna harm you as much as it feels alarming at times to get some very severe reactions, you know.
Yeah.
So I would say that my healing journey, as like as difficult as my low points have been as a practitioner, and like I have friends who have had, I would say, very much more severe alarming things happen in their healing journey, like rashes all over their body show up,
Right. Yeah.
and you know, inflammation during that time. um and it's not good to compare. I would say it's
Right.
not good to compare, but during, what my point is with that is it's just, what was my point? It's just, I would say that there's a lot of very intense things that happen, but they didn't
Yes.
die from that. Like
Right.
you can't die from a rash.
Right. Right. Yes.
As painful as it is and discomforting as it can
Yes.
be, to keep your priorities with this intention to really support your body's systems to heal
Yeah.
themselves, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
That was my
absolutely.
point.
No, really, yeah, really important because, as uncomfortable as some of this gets, like it's not going to be like the die off is not going to be fatal, things like that. And so it's just a matter of like, how can we have this trust and faith in some ways that we are going to get through the other side, and
Mhm,
bolster ourselves with as much support as we can through
mhm.
sometimes a really difficult process. And it's okay to have days where, you feel really like sorry for yourself. Like you said, like I think it's important to be authentic with your own emotions, and
Yeah.
not hold things in and not just kind of white knuckle it and acknowledge like, oh my gosh, this is so hard right now. When I
Mhm.
went through gaps the first time, like that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I got so sick from it. So it's okay to acknowledge like, yeah, it's really hard. And I have so much trust in myself that I can handle it and I will get through the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I have about 10 minutes left, I think, before I need to end. So maybe we can try to get through a couple of questions that were sent in just for the
Sounds
last little
good.
bit. Okay. Let's see here. This is very relevant. The first one was how to tell the difference between a detox reaction and being stagnant.
Yes. And I thought that was an interesting question
Yeah.
because I think a lot more people want to know the difference between a detox reaction and like um, a healing reaction, right?
Right.
So with like reintroducing foods and things like that. So I'd love for you to answer too, Jen, if you would like,
Sure.
so they can, people can get two types of ideas. But I would say, being stagnant, if you feel like you're being stagnant, usually there's not a lot of um, symptoms that are going to present. If you are stagnant in some symptomology that's like I mentioned before, like gastrointestinal symptoms can typically vary quite a bit. And
Mhm.
so with regards to stagnation with like gastrointestinal symptoms, I think that's the clearest one to talk about, where um, that's fine. Like
Yeah.
those are fine. Usually detox reactions will happen around the huge family die-offs. And
Yeah.
there's some time periods for that to happen. Like
Yeah.
the 1 month mark of if you're on GAPS, like a micro or any, GAPS is like the main
Yeah.
microbiome shifting diet, but SCD similarly. But the 1 month mark, 3 month mark, 6 month mark, 1 year mark, and 24 month mark. Those are
Yes.
really good times to notice and put on the calendar and like schedule with a practitioner at that time, because your symptoms are going to get worse.
Yeah.
And that's totally normal and expected.
Yes.
And definitely a detox reaction during those times,
Yeah.
not a stagnation of your symptoms or healing. And I think, so going back to the gastrointestinal symptoms as being like a clear example of this, of being stagnant. Stagnant's not always bad, I would think. Like being stagnant with some improvements, if you're still on a microbiome shifting diet, you haven't changed much with that. I'd say give it 6 months. If you're still stagnant after that period of time, then try something new.
Yeah.
Because I think those 6 months is a good enough time to see that, healing does happen in micro changes. So we're not always acknowledging those things.
Yes.
So I would say being stagnant is not terrible. It's not a bad thing. I think healing's still happening.
Right.
Yeah. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. I really try to take the perspective that our bodies know what they're doing, and like your body will detox as much as it can at any given time. And so sometimes your body will actually like be stagnant intentionally to like pace your detox. And I think this is especially true with people who have been severely ill for a very long time. Like some of my sickest clients will kind of like the first 6 months of GAPS, they're like very, very ill and kind of seeming like they might be stagnant, right? But it's just like their bodies there's so much toxicity, their body is pacing it on purpose, right? So the stagnation can actually be a gift in that way, right? But I would agree. It's just a matter of like an acute detox is like you're seeing rapid symptom shifting, right? You're seeing like, like I've had people's like it's eczema, their eczema is like moving all around their body at like a rapid pace. Okay, that's detox, like, right? But if things kind of feel kind of like steady and like stuck, that's a little more stagnation. But like you're saying, if you're doing all the healing practices, that's not necessarily bad. Like your body might be protecting you a little bit. And so just that patience.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's such a good question.
Okay. In terms of sun exposure, someone's optician told them to get UV sunglasses for macular degeneration in the context of UV rays increasing in recent years. And what to do about this in relation to resetting the circadian rhythm.
So the UV rays are definitely getting more intense. I looked this up. It's actually more intense just primarily away from the equator, which is fascinating.
Oh, really? I would have thought the opposite. Yeah, interesting.
I know. Isn't that really interesting? But it has to do with ozone. But really, with what I think we should focus on is ancestrally human. Like if we go to, Mary Reddick is going to visit the tribes and indigenous tribes all over the world, and they do not get macular degeneration. Right. So why do we get macular degeneration? And it's, increased UVB and UVA rays are contributing to oxidative damage to the retina and macula, but that's not the only thing that's happening. So there's two different nutrients that are in abundance, found in abundance in the eyes. There's a lot actually, but we'll focus on just two that are kind of like potentially protective against these things. And that's
I think you're gonna say my favorite. Okay, go ahead. I'm just excited about what you're gonna say. Sorry.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah, it's a lutein and it's a Xanthaxin.
Oh, I thought you were going to say vitamin A.
I know. Well, vitamin A is as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting though. Those are the two you highlight. Yeah.
Yes. So those are phytotoxins, but they're not just found in plants. They're actually found in egg yolks, which is funny. You say
Right.
vitamin A,
Like
right?
salmon
So,
roe too, I think. Yeah.
yes.
Interesting.
So those foods I think are going to be highest in abundance over, like a lot of people will say like dark leafy greens and carrots are going to contain the lutein and I cannot say that word, but it's Zanaxanthin. But
I'm not even going to try.
thank you. Yeah, so those two, I would say getting those in massive amounts from animal products would be best for your eyes to like protect that. And then if you need to wear sun protection for your eyes because you have macular degeneration already and you're working on your diet for that, I think, or if you're prone to it and you want to protect, I'd say make sure you get your circadian rhythm, exposure to sunlight, and then getting at least, I'd say at least like 30 minutes of sunlight, but I definitely think you need more than that. And then like if you're outside all day long, like half the day don't wear your sun protection on your eyes, and then the other half do. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing to get at that.
No, I agree. Like we have so many assaults from like synthetic artificial sources that like my personal perspective is like the more natural ones is probably the least of our worries, right? So I mean, why is this not seeming to be an issue for people who are living in a very traditional way, right? Like some amount of oxidative stress is normal, honestly. Like you can't avoid it completely. So like prioritize like, probably the most significant sources, which probably for most Westerners is not going to be from like UV sunlight rays. But like you're saying, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like get a baseline and then like slowly increase as you feel like your body tolerates. Like some people I just have who are really sensitive to sunlight. I just have them start with like 5 or 10 minutes a day, and then you can slowly work up as it feels right for your body.
Absolutely. I used to be so sensitive to sunlight because of my adrenal glands being like shot and all of that. And so you definitely can, don't always start slower, because when we're going from this modern lifestyle back into ancestral wisdoms, we're not as prepared. Like our body's not well trained to do what just a typical human would have done.
And yes, I am going to post the live recording on my page, so people will be able to rewatch it just for the comment. Cool. Let's maybe do one more. Ideal time to fast during a woman's cycle. I am so curious if you have opinions on this, Natalie.
Yeah, I do. A good friend of mine, Pauline Giselle Goossens, she has a hormone program, and I'm a guest in her program, but really in looking at all of the different hormones and like what they do, and the initial phase, so menstruation up until ovulation is kind of like is considered like the winter phase, and it's totally normal because estrogen's starting low during menstruation, and then it's ramping up, as well as like testosterone peaks around ovulation, that our metabolism is actually slower during that time. And so we don't need to eat as much. And so intermittent fasting is typically like easiest at that time for women. And I'm so curious to hear more about like how ancestral people, women in like tribes work, because I'm pretty sure that they're not really, I don't know, that I'm just so curious about this, but I think for sure around ovulation is the best time to do like a longer fast. So if you wanted, for a lot of PCOS and endometriosis people with estrogen dominance, I'll have them do, once their nutrition stores have been rebalanced after like about 6 months, I'll have them start to do longer fasts, like 24, 48 hours. Some of them can even do longer, but it's best to do that around ovulation. The reason for that is that your hunger hormones actually reduce during ovulation because your body's just trying to get it's just focused on getting pregnant and
Right.
looking really good to and this isn't like a weight loss thing. Like the fasting is when you do longer term fasts like that, you're just getting at autophagy, cleaning out dead cells, and it's not for weight loss typically. And it improves hormonal sensitivity as well to do it during that time. But I don't usually recommend the longer fasts for women. But if you're going to do a longer fast, it's best to do it during like your follicular phase leading up to ovulation, because the luteal phase is super, your body's like thinking that you're pregnant and you just got pregnant. And so it's preparing to have a baby. So women need to have like 200 to 300 more calories during your luteal phase, because that's going to help nourish progesterone levels so that you can get pregnant and stay pregnant with the progesterone levels. And insulin levels are higher and cortisol levels are also higher during naturally, and that's just normal. But then when we see hormone imbalances is because there's a lot more stress, cortisol, and high carbohydrate diets leading to insulin resistance, that we see a lot of imbalances in that time. But fasting is not the best during your luteal phase, which is from ovulation all the way to you start bleeding.
Beautiful. I love that explanation. And it's so nice to tie those things to like the practical sense of like what is actually happening in the body. It makes so much sense that way. Yeah,
totally.
Awesome.
And it's like it's so cool to start tracking your own flow with that. And I highly recommend Pauline's course for that if you want to get more in touch with your like all the different parts of each day of your cycle is so different. Our hormones are like, the ego is what Pauline says. It's like,
interesting.
It really can kind of overthrow some of like our logic, or like what we when we'd be in like our higher selves, like and so balancing those, or just being aware of like and aware of the different phases is totally empowering as a female.
Absolutely. And sorry, what was the name of the person whose course that is?
Pauline Giselle is her like handle, her Instagram handle, but it's a 3-month hormone balancing workshop. So and it's like live with that. So very highly recommend it. Or nutrition sessions with me, I'll teach you too.
Yay, yes. And I do have to get wrapped up here, but thank you so much for sharing all of this conversation. That was just delightful. And yes, Natalie has her own private practice, Nutrition with Confidence, so definitely check her out. She'd be a wonderful person to work with.
Totally. Thank you so much, Jen. It was so nice to talk to you. I really hope to, like, everybody, like, your healing story is incredible. Like, I think that if you can heal, like, if we can heal, we can, like, anybody can heal is really how I feel. Like,
I hear you.
So thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Oh my gosh. Wait, hold on. I have you muted. Okay, there you are.
Okay, I'm gonna end the recording now.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jen.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.